Welcome to Lesson 19, Day 38, Reading and Speaking Fluency / GUM. Today's learning target: I can read a text aloud fluently. I can evaluate my own fluency strength. You will need your independent reading text, a journal, or a blank sheet of paper, and a pencil. Let's practice evaluating our fluency again. We recently used this self-assessment checklist to evaluate ourselves as readers. We will continue to work on this again today. Let's reread a familiar text. This is an excerpt from the previous lesson about overcoming challenges. Listen carefully as I read aloud. Think about the criteria or the characteristics of fluent reading we discussed and that are also listed on the self-assessment checklist, and how I might assess myself as a reader when I am done reading. Overcoming writing challenges. Writing is an important skill because we use it to communicate with others. For example, we write letters, texts, and emails to talk about and share news with people all over the world, and we write to communicate research and learning. Writing can be challenging because there are so many spelling, punctuation, and grammar rules to remember. In this writing contract, I have identified 2 of my most significant writing challenges and some strategies I will use to overcome those challenges. This year, I am going to focus on making sure my sentences make sense and punctuating dialogue so that I can follow their example. I will also ask peers to specifically focus on checking how I have punctuated dialogue when reading for peer critiques. These strategies will help me improve my punctuation. Which criteria do you think I need to work on? What advice would you give me? Take a few minutes and think about which criteria or characteristic of fluent reading do I need to work on based on the example I just gave when reading Overcoming Writing Challenges. Pause the video for a minute and think about which 2 you would suggest I work on. What did you come up with? What advice would you give me based on my reading? Maybe your advice would be for the characteristics that says I can read at a speed that is appropriate for the piece. You might tell me to slow down and speak louder, or speed up a little and speak a little quieter. For the characteristic that says I can use the appropriate tone to express the author's meaning, you might recommend I be more expressive in my tone, and you might also suggest that I use face and body language to convey meaning. What other recommendations did you make? Now it's your turn to practice reading your independent reading text and decide what advice you would give yourself about your fluency. What will you have noticed yourself doing as a reader? You will need to look back at this characteristics of fluent reading, and you will need to check with a family member or a friend to help you determine what advice you might give yourself as a reader. But I do want you to self-assess yourself and think about what's your advice for yourself as a reader. Pause the video and read a familiar text or portion of the text. Decide what advice you would give yourself. Pause the video. Great job. What have you learned about evaluating your own fluency? You can work on improving your own fluency by using the criteria or the characteristics of fluent reading from the self-assessment checklist to practice whatever areas you are not scoring as high as you would like to. Be sure to have a family member or friend partner with you in evaluating your fluency. Today's learning targets. I can read a text aloud fluently. I can evaluate my own fluency strength. Has your understanding of today's learning targets improved? Think about what part of the lesson helped you the most. This concludes today's lesson.